And joining us today, he is the Senior Director of Partner Relations at AgAmerica. Curt Covington is with us. Curt, great to catch up with you again, sir. How are you today?
Good, Jesse, and you?
I am doing great, Curt. Thanks for the time. We have plenty of things to talk about here today. And I think top of mind first, it's been a big item here in the news, obviously, the last couple of days, the midterm elections. And looking on the agriculture side, thinking about what this could mean for the upcoming farm bill. As it stands right now, I know there's still some question on a few races and who's going to control both chambers, the House and the Senate. Just as you take a look at how the midterm elections have kind of wrapped up here almost, what do you think the impact is going to be here, specifically on agriculture, Curt?
Well, I would start by saying I guess it depends. We still don't have answers to all the races, but in the end, the Farm Bill historically has been a across the aisle compromise, and I suspect that will be the case with the next Farm Bill. Although I do think that it'll get extended, and the reason I think it gets extended is if you really look at the makeup, particularly of the House. I think there's only been 180 members who have actually voted on a farm bill before. Now, those numbers may not be totally accurate, but then you also have a whole new group. The way it's shaping up, a new group of Congress people coming in that are going to have to get educated on the farm bill. So I just don't see any quick fix to this, and I'm concerned that it's going to get it extended.
Well, I think one positive is that depending on who takes control of what chamber, that at least the top leadership on the Ag Committee doesn't appear it will change at all, Curt.
That's correct. And I think the one thing we have going for us, Jesse, and I just said this a minute ago, is that historically this has been a bipartisan bill.
Yep.
And I think the easy way, if we were to get this farm bill done, is providing more dollars for food and nutrition. Ultimately, that's how you're going to get this deal done. And, I think if you look at the Democratic side of the aisle, their concerns are with climate and conservation, key issues there. And the Republicans are focused primarily on strengthening the farm safety net, including, and we've talked about this before, the indexing of what is now referred to as reference prices for some of these, what used to be known as target price. I guess reference price is what we use today, because right now they're not relevant. And that impacts, PLC, ARC, loan rates, crop insurance, and even potentially margin coverage insurance. So that's kind of how I see it, kind of setting up right now.
Well, and you mentioned the food and nutrition side, and I know that there's been, some people who have talked in previous years about trying to split food and nutrition from some of the ag policy, but I know there's a lot of folks who are against that. And you brought up a great point about how there's different things that folks are looking for in this farm bill, and it's always kind of the give and take, it feels like, with a farm bill discussion on getting all of these things done and trying to write a farm bill that is not just state by state, but it's for the entire United States, Curt.
Yeah, so I've heard this catcalls before about splitting nutrition away from the traditional commodity side of this. I think that ultimately, in order to get a farm bill done for our farmers, doesn't make a lot of sense. Ultimately, if you split this up and then you come back in and strip out food and nutrition from the farm bill and ask to raise reference rates to provide farmers a safety net program, when particularly in a year where you see grain and commodity prices in pretty good shape across the board, I think what happens then is that then you start getting some pushback from the other side of the aisle. But to me, ultimately, this deal is going to stay together at the present time. There's not going to be any desire to do anything otherwise. But the question is going to be, Jesse, is the pie going to get bigger for the farm bill, which I think is probably the case, or does it just get divvied up differently if there's not an appetite to raise it? And CBO says that it's about 1.3 trillion as they've scored it, which 1 trillion to 1.1 trillion is for food and nutrition.
Well, Kurt, I think about as well, you brought up another great point just with how commodity prices are looking fairly strong. The ag economy still looking good. But I think about different things such as the cost of inputs, the rising farmland prices, and its impact on farmers in the industry. And it just feels like, when the dollars keep getting larger, it just makes it feel like there's more on the line for our farmers and ranchers in rural America, Kurt.
Yeah. So as we've talked about before, top line revenue, right,
Mhm.
is probably going to be one of the better we've seen in a long time. Um, Across the basic commodity groups, pricing is pretty good shape. The challenge, obviously, is as you talked about, are these input costs. And again, it depends on what crop you're farming, depends what part of the country you're in. But undoubtedly, and as a general rule of thumb, what we're seeing is that input costs are up about 40% from where they were a year ago. And that's just for your basic seed, fertilizer, chemicals. But then you start adding a couple other things, and it depends on where you are and what your balance sheet is structured. Like interest cost used to be for the last 10 years, interest cost was basically, I'm going to say this, and this might upset a few people, but money was free, pretty close to free. That's no longer the case. We're back to a normalized interest rate, and people have to consider that when they look at how much their budget for input costs, including rent on borrowed money, has gone up.
Well, I know with AgAmerica, Kurt, you guys, America's largest non-bank agricultural lender, and you brought up a great point. Farmers are looking at any sort of lending right now. They're looking at their operation. I know we've touched on this before, but has anything changed? What are those conversations like between farmers and say AgAmerica right now? What are some things that AgAmerica is doing to try and help farmers with rising interest rates right now?
Well, AgAmerica, as you had stated, is probably the largest originator of agricultural mortgages across the United States. We do business in all 50 states. It's kind of interesting. We always get asked, where are interest rates going? Well, if I knew that, I'd be the first one to tell you. But what I do know is that we have a suite of products that allows those that want to stay short on the interest rate yield curve, interest-only products, shorter term, for those that think that maybe interest rates will fall off in a year or two or three, for those that prefer to, maybe have a psychology that they'd rather lock in a rate and be able to sleep at night. You can go out as long as 30 years if you wish. And that's really a personal decision by that farmer as to what he thinks. We give him guidance as best we can. Ultimately, what this comes down to in our discussions with our borrowers are pretty much two things. You got to separate your needs from your wants at this time. You've got to separate what are the things you need to buy, the things you need to have, and separate that from the things you'd like to have but aren't necessarily to operate the business. And I get that. Sometimes that's new equipment. Sometimes that's more land. Potentially that may mean, do they want to, given how strong the economy is for agriculture today, do they maybe take more out as a living expense? All those things have to be looked at really, really hard. And the second thing we talk to them about are the things that we can't control, but they need to understand. And that is, you got to have a very strong marketing plan for your commodities. Okay. Don't leave profits on the table. And so you have to decide for yourself as a farmer. And we talk to them about this, that having comfort in knowing what you're going to sell that crop for at harvest takes a whole lot of risk off the table.
Great thoughts, great advice. Kurt, before we wrap it up, run out of time, anything else you'd like to mention or reiterate for folks who are listening and just kind of watching everything surrounding the ag economy and agriculture in general right now?
No, you know what? It's been a great year in agriculture, and I'm just proud to be able to serve those farmers across the United States. I hope they all have a great Thanksgiving, and I give thanks for them. And I give thanks for all my ag bankers out there that I've done business with over the last 45 years for what they've contributed to this economy.
Well, I know folks can learn more agamerica.com with that Curt Covington with AgAmerica. Always a pleasure to catch up with you, sir. Thanks for the time, and wish you a happy Thanksgiving as well coming up, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Jesse.